There is a house in Holland Park, London, that most people will never see the inside of. It sits behind iron gates on a quiet street, its Victorian Gothic towers rising above the neighborhood's roof lines, like something borrowed from a darker century. The ceilings inside are painted gold. The fireplaces are carved with mythological figures. The stained glass windows took craftsmen years to complete. And somewhere inside all of that extraordinary architecture, Jimmy Page, 82 years old, sober, and by all accounts still working, has finally started talking. Not about the glory days, not about the records, or the tours, or the money, about the things he kept quiet for half a century, the things his bandmates never confirmed and his managers actively buried, the things that, now that he is 82 years old with nothing left to protect and no reputation left to manage carefully, he has decided the world deserves to hear. What he has revealed has genuinely shaken people who thought they understood him. And once you absorb what he has said, you will find that Led Zeppelin, the music, the mythology, the entire machine, sounds fundamentally different than it did before. To understand what Jimmy Page has revealed, you first have to understand what Jimmy Page actually built, because most people, even devoted fans, understand only the surface of it. Led Zeppelin was not simply a rock band. It was a system, a deliberately constructed, obsessively controlled, total creative and commercial operation that Jimmy Page designed from the ground up with the same precision he applied to every guitar solo he ever recorded. All 9 studio albums reached the top 10 on the American Billboard chart. 6 of them reached number 1. 8 consecutive albums topped the charts in the United Kingdom. Somewhere between 200 and 300 million records have been sold worldwide. Led Zeppelin 4 alone, the album with no title, no band name on the sleeve, identified only by 4 cryptic symbols, has sold over 37 million copies. Stairway to Heaven was never released as a commercial single, and yet it became the most requested and most played song on American rock radio throughout the entire 1970s. In 1974, at the absolute peak of their commercial power, Page and manager Peter Grant launched Swan Song Records, giving the band total control over their releases, their artwork, their schedules, and the artists they chose to support. Grant negotiated touring deals where Led Zeppelin received 90% of concert gate receipts, a figure so far above the industry standard that it permanently restructured the financial relationship between artists and promoters across the entire music business. These were not the decisions of a musician who got lucky. These were the decisions of someone who understood exactly what he was building and exactly how to protect it. Ahmet Ertegun, the Atlantic Records chairman who signed them and observed them for decades from closer than almost anyone else, said it plainly: Page was the least conventional, the most personal, and he developed a style that nobody else could replicate or explain. But here's what Page has finally begun to say out loud, and why it matters so much now. For 50 years, Page maintained a careful silence around the deepest architecture of what he created. He gave interviews. He discussed techniques, influences, sessions, recordings. He spoke with intelligence and precision about the music. But there was a layer underneath all of that. A layer involving the true cost of what he built, the things that were lost in the building of it, and the private reckoning he has been conducting inside Tower House ever since, that he simply did not discuss. Not with journalists, not publicly, barely by all accounts, with anyone. What he has revealed now concerns 3 things that have defined his inner life for decades, and that the world consistently misread or ignored entirely. The first is the true nature of his relationship with John Bonham's death and what it actually did to him. On the 25th of September 1980, John Bonham was found dead at Page's rented house in Windsor, Berkshire. He was 32 years old. He had consumed a quantity of alcohol in a single day that human physiology cannot survive. His body asphyxiated during sleep. Page has spoken around this event many times over the decades, but always with a kind of controlled distance, the language of a man describing something he witnessed, rather than something that broke him in ways that took years to become visible. What he has finally acknowledged is simpler and more devastating than anything he said before. He could not look at his guitar for nearly 2 years, not because of grief in the abstract sense, but because the guitar was inseparable from Bonham in his mind. Every sound he had made on that instrument for 12 years had been built on top of what Bonham was doing behind him. The two of them had developed a musical relationship so intuitive and so specific that Page has described it as something that cannot be taught and cannot be reproduced. When Bonham died, Page did not simply lose his drummer. He lost the musical foundation that everything he had built rested on. The guitar felt like a room in a house where something terrible had happened. He could not enter it. The second thing Page has revealed concerns the occult dimension of his work, and specifically what he now believes about it. For decades, the occult symbolism woven through Led Zeppelin's albums and Page's personal life was discussed as either sinister or theatrical, depending on who was doing the discussing. The symbols on the fourth album, the Boleskine House on Loch Ness, which Aleister Crowley had purchased in 1899 to perform a 6-month ceremonial magical operation and abandoned before completing, meaning, according to tradition, that whatever he summoned was never properly dismissed. The occult bookshop Page opened on Kensington High Street in 1970. The deliberate encoding of alchemical and tarot imagery into the band's visual language, all of it personally directed by Page. What Page has now been willing to say, with the directness of someone who has had decades to think about it, is that he genuinely believed in what he was doing. This was not performance. This was not branding. This was not a young man playing at darkness to seem interesting. He was a serious student of Crowley's system from the age of 15, and he believed, and in certain respects continues to believe, that the music he made was connected to forces and states of consciousness that purely technical or emotional explanations cannot fully account for. What he fears, and this is what has shaken people who have spoken with him recently, is that some of what the symbolism invited in stayed. He has said privately that he wonders whether the sequence of catastrophes that defined Led Zeppelin's final years, Robert Plant's son dying in 1977, Bonham's death in 1980, the implosion of everything, was entirely coincidental. He does not say this as someone who is certain of it. He says it as someone who has spent 40 years being unable to fully dismiss it. The third revelation is perhaps the most personal, and the one that reframes everything else. Jimmy Page has finally spoken with real clarity about what sobriety gave him access to that the decades of consumption had taken away. Not productivity. He was extraordinarily productive during the years when his substance use was at its most extreme. Not creativity, not ambition. What sobriety gave him back was the ability to be present inside his own life in a way that fame and substances and the sheer consuming machinery of Led Zeppelin had made impossible for a very long time. The woman who has been beside him for nearly a decade, the poet Scarlett Sabeck, whom he met at a poetry reading at World's End Bookshop on the King's Road in London in late 2013, when she was 24 years old and had just self-published her first collection, has described him in terms that appear in almost none of the 50 years of coverage written about him. She has said he is her best friend. She has said he makes her laugh more than anyone else does. She has said that he does not drink, that he has seen all sides of that particular coin and lost people he loved to it, and that the man she lives with inside Tower House is genuinely, quietly, strikingly happy. Page has confirmed this, not with sentimentality, with the measured tone of someone reporting an unexpected outcome. After everything he built and everything it cost him, he did not expect the final chapter to feel like this, like cooking meals in a kitchen in Holland Park, like watching someone he loves perform her work, like tending an archive of 50 years of music in a house with painted gold ceilings, surrounded by master tapes and instruments and original artwork and unreleased material whose full extent only he knows. He did not expect it to feel, in the most uncomplicated sense, like enough. What Jimmy Page built was not simply a discography. It was a method, a way of approaching creative work with total intentionality, from the guitar sounds to the album artwork, to the occult symbols pressed into the vinyl, to the touring percentages that rewrote the music industry's rules. Bob Spitz, who spent years researching the most detailed biography ever written about Led Zeppelin, concluded that what Page constructed was not just music but a methodology, and methodologies, unlike careers, do not simply end. The man is 82 years old. His official channels have been hinting at archival projects, possible expanded releases, unreleased material. In 2024, his social media accounts discussed the Coverdale Page album from 1993 and suggested a possible expanded release, including a previously unheard track. Whether this is the beginning of something larger or simply the ongoing work of a man who has never stopped being curious is not yet clear. What he told Classic Rock magazine in 2020 was this: "I am never not doing something, and I am never not doing something that is going to surprise people." He was not being vague. He was being precise. Forbes magazine ranking him the greatest rock guitarist who ever lived was not a nostalgia exercise. It was a recognition of something that the 5 decades of coverage around Jimmy Page has consistently underestimated. The music did not merely capture a moment, it built something structural, something that a band dissolved in December 1980 can still outsell the majority of active artists working today, more than 40 years later. That does not happen by accident. That does not happen through talent alone. That happens when someone understands not just how to make music, but how to make music that means something at a level below the reach of trend or time. What Jimmy Page feared, what he has finally revealed he feared all along, was not failure. He feared something quieter and harder to name. He feared that the cost of what he built would turn out to have been higher than the building was worth. He feared that the losses would eventually outweigh the music. He feared that the silence after Bonham died would be permanent, that the room he could not enter would stay closed forever. It did not. He found his way back into it, not as the same person who left, but as someone who had carried the full weight of what that room contained, and learned, slowly and with considerable difficulty, to sit inside it again.